Hi, I'd like to welcome you to SIS Global to Local, which is a webinar series organized by American University's School of International Service. My name's Steve Silvia. I'm a professor at SIS, and my research focus is on comparative employment relations. I've written a lot about German and US industrial relations, and I'm currently finishing a book titled The United Auto Workers' Attempts to Organize Foreign-Owned Car Plants in the South. Today's webinar is titled The State of Work in 2022. The working world has changed dramatically in recent years. The COVID pandemic has transformed the workplace. It's led to widespread telework from home for those who could do so. And it's radically altered work for those who can't work from home, especially frontline workers. The pandemic has also led many to reevaluate the meaning and significance of work in their lives and the expectations that we all have regarding work. This reevaluation has prompted many to change jobs or to leave the workforce altogether in what's been called the Great Resignation. Now, the pandemic is not the only development that's changed work recently, however. Widespread calls for fairness and equity, especially in the wake of the police murder of George Floyd, have motivated workers to demand greater fairness and equity at work. Workers have begun to insist that employers who claim to be progressive on a range of issues live up to their claims by treating their workers better and giving them more voice at work. Employees at workplaces that rarely have had unions in the past, such as coffee shops, magazine and newspaper offices, think tanks, and universities, have begun to organize in greater numbers. Employees at other types of workplaces, for example, Amazon warehouses, have engaged in innovative organizing campaigns. And in fact, as we start this webinar, the voting is counting in the union recognition elections, both in the warehouse that Amazon has in Alabama and in Staten Island, New York. Employers, however, have become increasingly aggressive in using techniques, some sophisticated, some not so sophisticated, to impede unionization. Today, we've brought together 5 people who've become active in their workplaces so that we can discuss their experiences and compare and contrast what's similar in different parts of the country and in different parts of the world. Our 5 participants are Pamela All. Pamela is a senior advisor for conflict prevention and management at the United States Institute of Peace, and she's also an adjunct professor at American University. She's become active in the union for adjunct professors at the university, and she'll be joining us a bit later. Michelle Eisen is our second participant, and she is a Buffalo, New York native. She's an organizing member of SB Workers United. She's also a production stage manager and has been working in the local professional theater scene for 18 years. She's worked at Starbucks for the last 11 years, both in Buffalo and in Hawaii. And I do have to mention something as an aside. I am a native of Buffalo, New York myself, and when I was born, my parents had an apartment on Elmwood Avenue where the Starbucks is where Michelle works. Our third panelist is Lasmary Douglas Salar, and she works for the German service sector union, ver.di, and she has worked on she started working at Zara and has worked on getting better working conditions for employees. And she's now an official within ver.di, the ver.di union. And our fourth panelist is Andreas Gangl, and Andreas is a worker at the Amazon warehouse in Bad Hersfeld in Germany. And he's also a member of the German service union ver.di, and he's participated in organizing workers and strikes at that warehouse in an effort to get a collective bargaining agreement with Amazon. Andreas is also an international contact person for Amazon workers. And our fifth panelist is Kate Hanik. She is a senior research assistant at the Brookings Institution. She's part of the USC Brookings Schaefer Initiative for Health Policy, where she's worked since 2019. She was part of the Brookings United Organizing Committee, which succeeded in forming a union at the Brookings Institution. So it's great to have all these panelists with us, and it's great to have you, the audience, and I want to let you know that we welcome audience questions. So please, if you have a question, please submit your question in the Zoom Q&A box. Just click on the Q&A thing at the bottom in that bar in Zoom. And I'll get to as many of them as I can. So I'll start with a question. It's a question for all the participants. And that is, what led you to become active in your workplace? And I'll do it in the order that I introduce people. Pamela isn't here, so I guess that would start with Michelle. So what led you to become active?
Well, I think it was a list of things, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring the pandemic into this. I think most of us got to a point, especially when we were working for places for a number of years, where we were put in positions during COVID where we were expected to perform above or beyond expectations that were pre-pandemic for no additional compensation, and in a position where we felt unsafe to be doing our jobs in a lot of places. I had reached a point last spring where I actually was just going to leave Starbucks. I was going to be done after a decade because I was tired. I was feeling very undervalued. I had a CEO that was announcing record-breaking profits in the middle of a pandemic, and I had coworkers who couldn't pay their rent and get groceries in the same week. And that's just not acceptable. And I didn't ever think that organizing was the right solution. It was a coworker that approached me a couple months after I'd made my choice to sort of leave relatively soon that said, hey, a bunch of us were talking and we were wondering what you thought about Starbucks unionizing. And I had no thoughts on it. I had no idea. It didn't even occur to me that would be the way out of this. And I asked her to tell me what she knew. And in about a 15-minute conversation, I realized that this was the right answer. It made way more sense to stay with this company that I had really come to love these coworkers for the last number of years and try to make it better from the inside out than it did to walk away from, years of dedication. And so that's what got me to that point.
Thanks. Las Mary, you probably started, this question would be an earlier time period when you first started getting involved and active in your workplace. It'd be great to hear about that.
Yes, actually, from the beginning on, I thought about that getting into working fights, working for better conditions at my job was the strongest ambition that I had, becoming a work council. So during this time and starting with all these struggles we had as employees at ZADA, we started to receive support by the union, ver.di. So this is when I understood that the unionization is actually the only way for me in the past and for employees in general to continuously improve better working conditions according to the needs we had back then at Zara, but also in general for the needs of the employees at their jobs. So what the trade union does, it supports the workers with implementing structures and strategies at the job for these working struggles. So out of this thought, I'm sorry for the lack of English now, but in this combination, the working fights that we have, they just grew, and we became stronger as employees, as work councils at the job, but also within the employers, not just in the store where we work at, but we started to get connected with different stores in the city, German-wide, and then it even became international-wide. So there was this chance of putting more pressure to the employer, to the company. And this is actually something we're doing with Amazon since almost 20 years now.
Yes, Andreas, it'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, when we start our organizing at Amazon, there was many problems that we have. There was no climatization.
Air conditioning.
Air conditioning. There was no. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
My English is not the best. There was no air conditioning in the warehouses. We have bad contracts. Many colleagues have part-time contracts. Came every holiday and then they go away, and the next time come back, and the Amazon breaks the rules at this contract, because you only could make 4 times a part-time contract, then you get a permanent contract. And we have colleagues working over 2 years with part-time contract, and all that bullshit happens at that time. And there was many fear at the colleagues, and the management. There was much arbitrariness. I hope I say it right, because the one colleague get a holiday and the other one get no holiday, and
yeah, arbitrary treatment. That's the right word. Yeah.
Yeah, and you go to the manager and says you have a problem, and he say, no, you have no problem. And that was the working condition at that time, and we say we must change something, and so we start to organize us, and ver.di, our union, have a project with secretary, an organizing secretary, and he says that there's a house of the union, there's a room, and you can discuss your problems. And so we meet outside of the warehouse and discuss our problems, and everybody see that he has the same problems, and so we start our project, and then we talk with our colleagues, and we get bigger in organizing and get more power to us and get stronger.
Yeah. Thanks, Kate. So let us know what led you to decide to get engaged at Brookings.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think as a whole, the non-supervisory early to mid-career staff at Brookings was noticing a lot of discrepancies discrepancies and inequities at work. And so the union sort of came to fruition out of a need for developing a more sustained commitment to diversity and inclusion, improving job security for early to mid-career staff at the institution, more robust paid family leave, clear benchmarks for compensation, benefits, and career plans. So there's definitely a list of grievances that folks at Brookings realized were varied across the board, sort of what Andreas was talking about in terms of arbitrary treatment. It felt like to a lot of employees. And personally, my engagement really stems from a sense of solidarity and recognizing in myself that I hold a lot of privilege, both in my own identities and in my current position at Brookings, and seeing how some of my coworkers didn't have the same quality of work that I did in terms of all sorts of things at the institution. And so for me, it really came from just the general care for my coworkers. And I think across the board, that was a big selling point for us, is that Brookings' own research has shown time and time again that Brookings, or that unions are really good for workers, and especially those who have been historically disadvantaged in the workplace. So workers of color, parents, women, workers with disability. And so it was really obvious by our own work that unions are good and would be good for a place like Brookings. And I also feel sort of a ancestral tie to the labor movement. I'm Irish Catholic, so both of those identity groups have a lot of involvement in the labor union. And then both of my paternal grandparents were in unions. So that when I was approached to join the organizing committee and get more involved, that sense of solidarity and then also connection to my own family and identity was really important to me.
Great, thanks a lot. That's great the way you tied in the Brookings research to make your case. That I really like that. Pam, welcome. It's good to have you here. And the question that I've asked everyone is, what led you first to become active as an employee in looking at employee rights and in working with the union?
Well, thank you. And I apologize for being late. I'm at the International Studies Association meetings in Nashville, and I got the time wrong. There's a time difference between Nashville and DC. So I just learned that when I came here. So apologies. But I am not very active in the union, although I have joined. And that to me was a big step, actually. I'm an adjunct. And adjunct faculty don't owe their first allegiance to the institution where they're adjuncting. So, I work for the U.S. Institute of Peace. It's a government agency or an institution. And although we have had issues probably similar to Brookings issues, they've been handled in different ways. And as an adjunct, you are, in fact, asked to join the union, and I kind of ignored it for a number of years, and with no reason to ignore it, except that as a busy person, you're sort of thinking about other things. My daughter is a professor at Cambridge University in England, and there, in fact, there's been a great deal of organizing about the faculty pensions, because of the system in Britain. Actually, I think the pensions are more or less controlled by the government, or the amount of pensions, and the government was basically threatening to cut faculty pensions, which are fairly low anyway. And so there has been organizing about it. There have been pickets. There has been what I recognize from my own growing up times, when we were much more active in the streets on practically every issue in the 1960s and 70s. I suddenly realized how important this collective action is. And so the next time I was asked to join the union, I joined. And I'm a big supporter of collective bargaining. I teach mediation, obviously very close to negotiation. I know a lot of people have trouble with negotiation, and it's very difficult to negotiate on your own behalf. There's something about having an organization that will look at the issues and kind of collect them in ways that they can be negotiated from a position more of strength than of not weakness, but loneliness. I think is very positive. So I have it in a way. I'm a late registrant to union life, but very supportive of it, and believe that it has an increasingly important place in our societies.
Great, thank you. It's great to have the wide variety of people with your experiences. So one thing I do want to remind people is that we really want questions. So if you have questions, please put a question in the little Q&A thing on the bottom of the Zoom where it says Q&A. And the thing that I'd like to ask as a second question is, the name of our webinar series is Global to Local. And, traditionally, when one thought of unions and when unions would do collective bargaining, they would either do it at the single workplace level or maybe at the national level. And the one thing I'm curious is about with each of your experiences, was it focused on your workplace, or were there things that extended beyond your workplace that either helped or hindered your experience in trying to get more voice at work? Now, I know some of you have mentioned this already, but I think building on it would be great. And if it is the case where, was just local, then it's fine to say that. That's because the types of workplaces we have here vary as well. So I think I'll go in the same order that I did. So that would start with Michelle. So yeah, tell us about the connections.
Well, I think when you're dealing with a humongous corporation like Starbucks, it can't all be on the local level because so many of their policies are national policies that affect everybody. There were certainly store-specific issues at my Elmwood location that hadn't been addressed for years or months, depending on what we were talking about, which I think helped rally my individual coworkers at that store to acknowledge that this was the best choice. It's very hard when you're trying to. I'm a novice to unionization and to organizing, so to go in there and convince your coworkers that this is the best choice for everybody, to use very broad global terms, it's hard to get people to get on board with something like that. But if you can focus on the issues that are specific to your location, I think that's where people start to understand that, yeah, it would be wonderful if, facilities calls were fixed in a few days instead of months, so that was in terms of getting people on board in my individual location. Yes, focusing on those store specific issues was the way to go. But there was also an acknowledgement that the company as a whole had some very large shortcomings. And a lot of the issues that we were dealing with went very, very, very far up the food chain. And so we needed to be aware of those and to be aware that the change that we were looking for didn't necessarily only take place in our one little cafe. It's why we decided to unionize on a store by store basis, as opposed to going after a market or a region or a state, because we wanted to make sure that those individual voices were heard in those stores. But we needed to let people know that unless we fought at this level, we were never going to see the broad change that eventually we would need throughout the company in order to make sure that they were held accountable and that we had a voice in our working conditions and, make those improvements.
Great, thanks. Mary.
I agree on a lot of which Michelle said. It's it starts local, but with big companies, it's a big structure they use, not just countrywide, even worldwide, if they have branches in different countries. At Amazon, actually, the first Amazon company in Germany opened in 1999. It's actually the place where Andreas is working at. And already in summer 2000, there was a work council which was built. And around Christmas in the same year, there was already an international action made by workers also in the US, where there was a flyer approaching all Amazon workers in Germany and the US to actually get together and to stand together to change or to already fight for better working conditions. And even though the Amazon was only 1 year in Germany, the people already understood that the working conditions are not good. So therefore, it's always important that people rise locally, because this is how they can approach to it. And ver.di actually, this is what ver.di does. They go to, for example, they went to Amazon and try to approach the people working in this building and confront them with the working conditions, and to give them the information that they are able to change their own working conditions. But it's always important that they have to do it. Nobody can do it for them. It's people changing their conditions to better. So this is how it started at Amazon. And I think Andreas can say a lot more to it.
Thanks. So Andreas, what would you add, particularly your work with the international cooperation among Amazon employees?
Yeah, I mean, when we started our organizing in 2011 with the organizing secretary, we have 2 warehouses in Germany, in Leipzig and Bad Hersfeld, and so it started local, but they open one warehouse after the other, and when we go on strike, the orders of the customers went to the other warehouses, and they have to do our work when we strike, and so we see that we must organize the whole company. And in 2014, Amazon goes to Poland and opens many warehouses in Poland without sell their products, their articles in Poland. The Poland colleagues only work for the German market, and though when we strike, every order go to Poland, and the Poland colleagues are very sad about this, that they have to work for us when we strike, and so the Poland colleagues came to Bad Hersfeld and visit us and join us, so that we talk together, and so we see that the Poland colleagues tell us their problems, and we see it's the same problems that we have little years before, because we could in this 3-4 years we can change something at our warehouses, but they have the same problems too. And then the France colleagues came to also to this meeting, and they told us the same problems again, and so it's all the time it's the same way the Amazon works. Also on new warehouses, they break every rule. They make the same way to pressure the workers, and so we must work together all over the world with every Amazon warehouse together, and not only the warehouse, also the delivery stations and sortation centers, because all Amazon colleagues have the same problem, and so we must organize every
Yeah,
Amazon house.
That is an old challenge, but with globalization, it's gotten bigger and more intense, that it's much easier for a corporation to operate worldwide than it is for workers to operate, to match them at the same level, to be sure. Yeah. So I want to circle back to that, but I'm just going to give Kate, and Pam a chance. For your instances, to what extent is any of your organizing beyond Brookings, or is it all local?
So a slightly different answer, because Brookings is a slightly different organization than Starbucks and Amazon, and so there was sort of a hyper local focus on our institution while organizing. But I will say, Brookings United, that's our union, sits under the professional employee, or the nonprofit professional employees union, NPEU, which is DC based and has done a lot of great work to help organize other think tanks and nonprofits in Washington, DC. So while we were organizing, we were seeing the work NPU was doing with the ACLU to get them sort of over the finish line with their bargaining contract, and then also would have members of the union over at the Center for American Progress come and talk to us and show the benefits of a union in a DC-based think tank. And then additionally, our colleagues over at the Urban Institute, they went public with their union asking for recognition on the same day we at Brookings did. So there was sort of that cross think tank solidarity there. And then to bring us slightly more outside of our local focus, NPU is a member of IFPTE Local 70, so the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, which is a union that has 80,000 members. So we did feel part of a larger movement. And I will say that the just public sort of support around unions during the time we were organizing at places like Starbucks and Amazon, and having scholars at Brookings comment on the work they were doing to organize their workplaces and saying how good it will be for workers was definitely beneficial, because we had all that research on unions. And so I do think we felt part of the larger labor movement, especially this moment we're in now, working sort of with other colleagues at think tanks, and then sort of following in the footsteps of brave colleagues at places like Starbucks and Amazon, I think helped definitely gain support internally, but our sort of asks and demands were much more focused on our individual workplace by nature of how the institution works.
Great, thank you. So Pam, you can be short on this if short is, the reality. I mean, you mentioned your daughter.
Is the reality.
Yeah.
I mean, first, organizing faculty is like herding cats. Everybody has their own idea and reasons. And also in the area that I teach in, we are internationalized. I mean, our focus is what's going on elsewhere. And so, if people are interested, they obviously have connected. I do hope we can get back to the issue that Andreas brought up of unintended consequences of union action, because, I certainly as a professor, I see a great possibility that would in fact harm student life in terms of if professors go on strike. So it would be great to be able to talk about that a little bit as well.
Sure. I think that'd be fine. So I guess there's that question, in which we can put out there in trying to exercise your rights, and in trying to improve your life. The tool that workers have is industrial action, as it's called, picketing, strikes, things like that. So that question of how do you manage industrial action in a way that helps you get your goals in a way that doesn't hurt or minimizes the hurt to third parties, to uninvolved people like customers and things like that. In some ways you do, in order to succeed, you do have to inflict some inconvenience, or why would the employer respond? But I think, let me ask Lasmeri that question, because you probably are the one who has to answer that question the most.
Third parties are usually included, and they will feel it too, like customers. And this is one of the measures, or one of the things we have to put pressure on companies, is when we include the customers. Of course, most customers don't like it. They will not get into solidarity with the employees. But the consequences for the customer is only short term, but it can be a big pressure on the company. So it is usually something that, as a union, or even the employees of a warehouse or a store, this is one of the goals, to get the third parties, like the customers, into action, to get them informed and to rise the pressure. And for the workers who are doing it, actually, there has to be the security, and this is something good that we have in Germany. So when the union actually calls out for a strike or for action or something, the single worker will not feel any consequences, because the union is the institution actually calling out for it or organizing it. So the worker is protected by that. It's actually law saying that every employee can be member of a union, and unions can call out for strikes in certain times in the year, and there will be no consequences for the people. And the consequences for the customers, they're only short term. So,
thanks. Michelle, do you have thoughts on this?
I do. My location actually had to stage a walkout and a strike about 3 weeks or so after our union was certified. We were in the middle of the Omicron variant, and the company had not responded in any sort of way that increased our safety in the workplace because of this variant. And we had coworkers who were coming into work sick because they didn't feel that they had another option. And we ended up having an outbreak in my location. And the company was not responding in a way that put us in any other position than to have to do this. And so what we ended up doing was, it was a very last minute kind of thing. We had asked the company to we'd asked a company for an emergency bargaining session where we discussed these issues with them. And instead of getting what I had hoped was at least some sort of compromise, they shot down every one of our demands, which were very, in my opinion, like we were asking for KN95 masks to be supplied. We were asking for paid self-isolation if we were exposed at work and needed to self-isolate. These were just the bare minimum. And I walked into work after the session the next day to find out that a coworker who had been in the ER the night before felt like he needed to come in and open the store because we were so short-staffed that he didn't think he had an option, and we were done. And so I looked around and I said, is everyone here comfortable walking out because of our safety? And they were. And so we contacted our union rep to just to let them know that this was happening, and they were incredibly supportive. And so just 3 weeks after we had certified our union, we walked out, and it ended up being about a 5-day strike for COVID safety. And we were the only store in the country that could do that at the time. We were the only unionized location in the country. And so we felt that we needed to take a stand and to show these stores that were in the process of organizing that this is the power that you can get from organizing your store. You know, we were covered by the union, so we couldn't be fired. As Les Mary was saying, we were covered in terms of because it was a walkout over safety issues, but also the union covered the lost time of the partners that were on strike, so there was no loss of income. And so there wasn't another store at all, another Starbucks in the country that could have the strength to do that at that time. It was also the beginning of January in Buffalo, New York, and the timing could not have been worse to be on a picket line, but it was necessary. And what ended up happening was within a couple of weeks, the things that we had demanded became Starbucks national policy in terms of, you know, providing KN95 masks and paid self-isolation. Now, they were very clear to state that it had absolutely nothing to do with the union and the union walkout and the strike. But I mean, anyone who had watched this and followed it knew that that was essentially what the result was of our walkout. I won't say it wasn't terrifying. I mean, I've never done anything like that in my life. And, you know, I think we all hope that we never have to get to a point like that in our workplace, but we wouldn't have had the strength to do it had we not had a union standing behind us.
So how did the customers respond to the walkout?
We're fortunate that a lot of getting to our victory at Elmwood was because the customer base at that particular store in that particular location is very, very strong, and we're very supportive from the beginning. I'm not going to say that there weren't a few that were a little put out. They did staff the store with management, like support management from that had been brought in previously from across the country to try and stop the union campaign to begin with. So if you were unaware of what was going on, I think there were some customers that went in anyway, but for the most part, the regular customers that had been sort of pushing for this the whole time with us were, you know, more than happy to go down the street to another coffee shop for a few days and, you know, get their coffee there.
Thanks. So Andreas, Pam posed the question about third parties to you, and so I'm curious, do you get reaction from people who would be saying, "Where is my Amazon package?" or that sort of thing? I know you're in the warehouse, so it's a little different. You're not out in the van delivering.
Yeah, we don't have contact to the customers, but we do for action for some years before told the customers to put a letter in the package we'll send back to, because returning to Amazon with his articles they don't want to have, and there came more than 100 letters to us, and we collected and give it to the manager. But I think they put it into the waste basket, and I know they make posters in the warehouse with letters from customers who talk fine about Amazon, and the bad ones we give them, they throw it away. So that's the normal game of this conflict. I think they all the time they say that everything is fine, and the customers are very happy about our work, and there's no problem. And we know that it sometimes is other. The customer thinks other. On Facebook, it's the Amazon site is open for sorry, I'm missing a word. to give a comment.
Yeah.
And many customers make a comment that we get the contract, the union contract with Amazon, and but
Yeah.
they give no answer of this.
So we've got an interesting question from Kevin. It said, one of you mentioned that the pandemic was a motivating factor for joining a union. How do you see the future of labor unionization and organization occurring in the wake of a world moving toward remote work and telework? So I don't know if any of you want to address that. That'd be great.
I think it was myself who mentioned it. I think that's a great question. And I think that the next few years are really going to be very telling in that. I think what we're seeing right now, as far as this huge bump in the labor movement, you're seeing it in sects that can't be virtual, can't be remote. You know, like I can't be a remote barista. That's not something, you know, Amazon workers can't be remote. So I think what we're seeing in the growth of this labor movement are the jobs that were very underrepresented and undervalued for decades. And now what the pandemic has done is put these workers in a position to reevaluate how much their labor is worth and what their time is worth to these, you know, large corporations that are just continuing to rake in mammoth profits off of their labor. I don't know what it will do for those who are able to work remotely. I would like to say that those workers should be just as represented by a union as those of us who don't have that option. It still is, there's a strength in being able to collectively bargain. Your labor isn't worth less just because you're able to do it, you know, from your kitchen table, in my opinion, than it is if you have to get dressed in the morning and, you know, go out and do your job public facing. So it may be a different type of organizing that gets you to that point, but you know, we're already seeing a different type of organizing. This is not the organizing from the 1930s and 1940s. So much of the organizing that's happened in the Starbucks campaign has happened virtually. You know, so much, you didn't have to, you know, even have a lot of these conversations about unionizing on the floor with your coworkers, because you could, you know, create a group text or a group me or an email account where you could have these conversations without sort of the fear of your manager overhearing or some corporate member being brought in. So I think we're already going in the direction of any group that feels like they need, you know, a bigger voice in their workplace should have the ability, but I think it's kind of a runaway train at this point. At least I hope that it is. And the only thing that might be kind of standing in our way, at least in the US, is that our labor laws need to now catch up to where organizing is going.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Kate, your organizing, part of it during COVID?
Yeah, I just wanted to hop off what Michelle was saying about organizing virtually. Brookings United, we held our first card signing event in late February of 2020. So we had just opened it up, had organized enough people, had found enough support that a union would be a viable option at Brookings, and people were passionate about it. We had our first card signing event, and then sort of 2 weeks later, everything shut down. And I think there's a big level of creativity that goes into having to organize virtually. And also looking forward to the future, that I think that creativity really needs to stand out, because I think one of our big selling points at Brookings United was a solidarity approach. And we would tell people who would say like, well, my job at Brookings, you know, feels pretty cushy, and so I don't want to go out on a limb, I don't want to rock the boat. And then talking and using talking points about how, well, that's not how it is for all of your coworkers and these people who used to sit right next to you in the office, or who you would go to happy hour with after work and eat in the lunchroom with. If we are moving into a more sustained remote period where folks maybe never meet their coworkers in person, I do think that will be a little harder to sort of lean on that solidarity piece, because people just won't know people in sort of the same personal level that you do when you're sitting in office or at your coffee shop during all throughout work. And so I think that in the future, you know, we had to get really creative. It wasn't like we had to cold call and cold email our coworkers, where if we were in the office, we would have just popped down to their physical office and said, hey, do you want to go take a walk around the block? Or can you get coffee tomorrow morning before work? Those kind of things. You like couldn't do that. You couldn't force people to sort of confront you as organizers. And so I think you have to be really tenacious in virtual organizing and bug people probably more than you're comfortable with. I mean, the amount of emails we would just send to people who are really hoping to get their support, you sort of have to get over a little bit of, am I going to be embarrassed to send a third email to this person without them responding? Like, are they going to be so annoyed with me? And know that sort of the movement is worth at least a third email. And that a lot of those folks we did eventually get to sign a card who did in the end support the union. And I think you almost feel more proud of yourself and your organizing effort when you sort of get those hard, sticky ones than people who are really passionate right at the beginning. I mean, that's great. You definitely need those people who are excited and fired up. But when you do get someone who's taken a while, it feels really good. But yeah, for the future of work in a industry like mine and a think tank in the research world, I think as more people move remote, that level of creativity will really need to stay at the forefront of our mind, and that like tenacity to get people to care about their coworkers and their job enough to support a union.
Thanks. Las Mary, this must be a concern in ver.di, moving to remote work and how you'll be able to keep some solidarity. What are people talking about? What are you doing in ver.di?
It will definitely be a big challenge, and we already recognized this, of course, during the pandemic. Our phone campaigning became stronger in certain branches, and phone campaigning can work depending on in which branch you are working with. Like, for example, people who work in offices, it's okay to do a phone campaigning. But usually I'm in the section of stores, like grocery stores, clothing stores. This is a big problem. If people are not working together anymore, if people cannot be close to each other, because of course we can send emails, but you have certain people who work in certain branches, they do not operate with emails so strongly, and they are not so open for it. So as a union, we do have to find different ways to communicate and to organize with the people, where we are trying to like widen our, how do you say, our competences, for example, with social media, connecting with people over Telegram or WhatsApp groups, these social messengers. But there is nothing comparing to real power of the people on the street, in the store. Like, so I see a really big challenge for all unions globally. As soon as the people will be torn apart, and companies are already trying to have people not working so close together. So Amazon, for example, in the warehouses, when it used to be that like many people were working in one section together, now there is a distance between these employees. So during a shift, they barely speak to other colleagues, even though they all work in the same warehouse. So yes, there's a telework, remote work, home office, or less people working in a section. For example, because of digitalization, it will be a problem. And we don't have an answer. I would say we don't have an answer for it yet to compensate.
Well, I appreciate it. That's been very helpful. And I've learned a great deal. It's been great having everyone here. That this event has really been fascinating, and I've enjoyed it quite a bit and learned a great deal. And I really want to thank you all for participating, and and I think everyone who's engaged in this has learned a great deal. So thank you so much. I definitely absolutely must thank Kate Arian for doing such a fantastic job in organizing this webinar. She came to me with the idea, and she's really was there every step of the way, making sure that it would happen. And so I just have tremendous thanks for Kate and everything that she did to make this happen. And I just have one last thing, and that is, for all these webinars, we always do a little commercial for the next webinar. And for our next webinar, I hope that you can join us